Have you ever been trapped in those meetings where the great team that you've built isn't really acting as a team? In fact, what you're either getting is no discussion at all, or you're getting a consensus of opinion that is really more like groupthink and nodding dog syndrome rather than actual consensus. Or maybe you're at the other end of the scale and you've got just fractious discontent and people kind of expressing their opinions loudly and verbally and just not really listening to each other. Whichever one it is, or maybe it's some combination of all of them, it's not really helping you to get to good decisions, and it's not really getting the best out of the team that you've built. In fact, you're starting to think that what you've got is a collection of individuals rather than an actual team. So there's various different ways that you can approach this, and one of the simplest is a thing called the 6 hats. Now, this was proposed by a guy called Edward de Bono, who wrote lots about lateral thinking and ways of teasing out your sort of creative thoughts and ways of getting the best out of yourself and other people. And the thing about the 6 hats methodology is it is so simple to understand that you can actually explain it to children. In fact, in some ways, children get it better than executives do, because executives have got that sort of acculturation where they kind of have a certain way of working. They're used to working in particular ways. So they have to unlearn some of what they've already learned, whereas children just adopt these things with creativity and just go for it. So what is the 6 hats? It's basically 6 different coloured hats. Don't worry, you don't need to have literal hats, although, you know, your meeting might be more fun if you did. And these 6 different colours represent different ways of thinking. They're each sort of basically a metaphor for different ways of thinking. The first one is the blue hat, which is for control and process. The second one is the white hat, which is all about facts and data. The third one is the red hat, which is about feelings and emotions. The fourth one is the yellow hat, which is about positivity and optimism. The fifth one is the black hat, which is about caution and risk awareness. And finally, the last one is the green hat, which is about creativity and thinking about solutions and that sort of lateral thinking piece. Now, how does that actually work in practice? Well, the first thing is the blue hat is only ever worn by one person, and he or she doesn't take the blue hat off metaphorically throughout the entire session. He or she is the facilitator. And it's usually the person who's called the meeting, or at least is running the meeting, to try and get the best out of everybody who's involved. Initially, the blue hat will kind of present the thing to be discussed. Let's say you're discussing something fairly big for the organisation, something like, should we move to a 4-day working week, or something like that. And then the facilitator will call upon somebody who's got the data, or the basic data, to present that data. Everybody's wearing a white hat now, metaphorically. So everybody's encouraged to think analytically, to only look at the facts and the logic, and not to allow anything else, no sort of preconceptions, no prejudices, and certainly no feelings to intrude in the discussion at this point. Is purely factual. So you might get the HR lead, for example, to say, present some data around, you know, what kind of impact moving to a 4-day working week might have on productivity, and what it might have in terms of impact on client service and that sort of thing. Once you've had a purely factual discussion, the facilitator then gets everybody to take off the metaphorical white hat and put on the red hat. Now, the red hat is usually quite a short section of the meeting, because it's literally just, what's your gut telling you? What's your feelings telling you? Search your feelings for this stuff. Sorry to quote Star Wars there, but ultimately it's that sort of initial, just what's in your heart, not what in your head. So you might go around the room and somebody might say, well, I love this. I think this is really good for our culture. I think it's great for work-life balance. I think it's great for respect, and it just feels right. You might have somebody else who says, well, I think it's great in theory, but actually it's making me nervous. I've just got a feeling we're going to lose more than we're going to gain here. Got nothing to back that up. It's just my gut. Once you've gone around the room and you've got your feelings. So you've got all the facts, you've got all the feelings in the room to start with. So that's why white goes first and then red goes second. You're now into starting to think about the options and the benefits and the risks. So you start with the benefits. So now everybody adopts the yellow hat. So you put on the yellow hat and you talk about everything that's positive. Even those people who are quite naturally risk averse and maybe will tend to see the glass as being half empty rather than half full, they all have to come up with something positive. And they have to look at the upside and only the upside of the 4-day working week. In this particular instance, in this example that I'm giving you. Then once you've exhausted that, then you get everybody to take off the yellow hat and put on the black hat. And the black hat is where you're looking on the dark side. You're looking at the things that potentially could go wrong. This, if you're going to do any kind of pre-mortem exercise, to quote Gary Klein, then this is the point at which you do it. So this is the area where those people who are naturally risk averse and naturally loss averse are going to come into their own. And everybody who is naturally positive, especially if you've got somebody who's maybe a little bit Pollyanna-ish, well, they're going to have to really struggle to come up with things that could be a downside. But this is good because what you're doing is you're forcing people to think in a way that is not necessarily natural to them. And therefore you're actually getting proper debate, you're getting proper discussion. And because everybody's wearing different hats at different times, nobody's taking it personally, nobody's judging this on somebody else's opinion, they're simply having to all think together collectively. Once you've got all of those things out, you then, as the blue-hatted person, get everybody to take off their black hats and put on their green hats. And this is where they're now going to start thinking slightly tangentially. What are the sorts of things you might be able to do with this? Oh, yeah, maybe you could, I don't know, instead of having like a set day off each week, it could be on a rota basis, so that actually you've still got a 24/7 operation if indeed that's what you need to have. You can look at ways of I don't know, using the 4-day working week to attract more talent, that sort of thing. So it becomes a very creative and sensible conversation at the end of it. Once you've got all of those different angles explored fully, you realise that the discussion you've had isn't really a discussion of true consensus. Instead, what you've got is all of the disparate potential viewpoints represented so that you can pull them all together and then summarise with your blue hat on exactly what we've just discussed. And from that, you can derive some really good quality outcomes. Everybody in the room feels like they've been heard. Everybody in the room feels like they've had a voice. Everybody in the room feels like they've truly contributed meaningfully to what was actually a very collaborative and quite constructive conversation. A conversation not based on consensus, but actually based on healthy, constructive challenge and healthy dissent, if you like. Then, when you leave the room with a set of very clearly defined actions that have come on the back of this, whether it's a trial period or whatever it is you've chosen to do, you can then have true consensus, because the only consensus that matters is not the consensus in the debate, it's the consensus in the execution. Because there is nothing worse than having a bunch of nodding dogs in a room all agreeing with each other when they're not really agreeing with each other, and then going out and doing something which is against the actions that have just been agreed. And the way to avoid that is by having the healthy debate in the room and then the healthy consensus of execution outside of the room. Hope that's helpful.